Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially healthcare. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Hey, it's Sterling K. Brown from the Hulu original series Paradise. The next chapter begins as Xavier's search for his wife takes him above ground, and what he finds will change everything. It was never just about the bunker. Tune in and discover the truth lies outside. Paradise, the official podcast, is now streaming, and stream Paradise on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone, and I'm your host, Roger Stone. So tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, Americans will hear from President Donald Trump as he delivers the first official State of the Union address of his improbable second term. He'll be talking about the momentum that has culminated behind the new American Renewal. The White House is signaling a confident, forward-looking speech centered on economic stability, affordability, and national strength. Listeners can expect the president to highlight the administration's work against inflation, improving markets, and a labor climate that is helping working families make ends meet again. The tone will likely emphasize that after a turbulent decade, the country is finally moving forward, predictably and towards normalcy, including lower energy costs and renewed domestic investment. Immigration and border policy will be another pillar of the president's speech, I predict. The president is expected to point out that border enforcement policies have dramatically reduced illegal crossings and restored law and order, not only an economic achievement, but also an extraordinary feat in terms of humanitarianism. The president is also expected to promote election integrity legislation and culture war issues that energize his MAGA base. Foreign policy could take a larger role than usual, considering the advent of the Don Roe doctrine in the Americas and the potential for conflict with Iran abroad. I expect the president to issue yet another warning to the Iranian regime in tonight's remarks. The administration wants Americans to see a stronger negotiating posture, meaning pressure on our adversaries, support for our allies, and targeted operations against cartel violence, which will restore deterrence without causing long, endless foreign wars. This is vintage peace through strength. That's the policy of Dwight Eisenhower, the policy of Ronald Reagan, not the policies of the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, and more recent presidents. And so far it is bearing fruit. What I like about Donald Trump's foreign policy is the way he projects American power in a very limited way, as opposed to committing us to endless foreign wars, mass American casualties, and billions of dollars of expenditures. This whole peace through strength is an important hallmark of conservative rather than neoconservative foreign policy. Inside the chamber, of course, he'll stand behind Vice President J.D. Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson, with the trio, I think, projecting party unity towards the upcoming midterms. I expect a long speech, well, that's Donald Trump, and an optimistic one as we look forward to the next chapter of the MAGA revolution, which again was defined by stability at home, leverage overseas, and a pitch that the administration's policies are delivering measurable results for everyday Americans. Meanwhile, in the Garden State, New Jersey Democrats are escalating their fight against ICE, and they're not sugarcoating their immense hatred for federal law enforcement. Lawmakers in the state assembly introduced the Fight Unlawful Conduct and Keep Individuals and Communities Empowered Act. I'll let you determine what vulgar acronym that might stand for. This bill targets immigration and customs enforcement by allowing individuals to sue in state court over alleged constitutional violations tied to federal immigration arrests. What's disappointing me is the F-ICE Act is a simple attempt to intimidate federal agents and obstruct enforcement of national immigration law. But what's even more disappointing is the substantial number of Republican assemblymen and Republican state senators in the Garden State who are supporting this outrageous legislation. These are what we call rhinos, Republicans in name only. The bill is part of a broader package designed to block cooperation with immigration authorities. Other measures would bar former federal immigration agents from state employment, tax detention facilities that house illegal immigrants, restrict federal agents at crime scenes, and even prohibit the use of state property for enforcement operations. New Jersey's new governor, Mikey Sherrill, I guess he pronounces it, issued an order preventing ICE from using state property and encouraged residents to film interactions with federal officers. The Department of Homeland Security says elected officials are blaming officers instead of addressing the consequences of illegal immigration. The legislation follows recent arrests near a transit station where local officials have openly confronted federal authorities. This is part of the nationwide effort by Democrats to help illegal aliens break the law. They want them here so they can ultimately give them amnesty, allow them to swindle the taxpayers, as we've seen in Minnesota, hook them up with benefits galore so they will ultimately vote for Democrats in perpetuity. That's the plan, and it will mean the death of the republic. This must be stopped at all costs. Deport them all and start treating Democrat leaders who aid and abet illegal immigrants as enemy combatants. I think that is the only answer. Meanwhile, former U.S. pandemic advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci is scheduled to headline the Health Tech Global Summit in Basel, Switzerland, a corporate-sponsored industry conference backed by pharmaceutical giant Roche. This business gathering features executives from J&J, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, Bayer, Merck & Company, Sandoz, and other companies that all played major commercial roles during the COVID-19 pandemic through the proliferation of vaccinations, testing, treatments, and supply contracts. Roche alone received multiple emergency authorizations for COVID diagnostic tests. J&J produced a federally authorized vaccination. Merck developed antiviral treatments. Other manufactured therapies, antibodies, and pandemic medical infrastructure, soaping up historic government spending and benefiting from the mass hysteria pushed by bureaucrats like Fauci. To this day, I don't understand how it is legal, but evidently it is, for Dr. Fauci and his wife, who was also a federal health official, to make millions of dollars on the very vaccinations that they attempted to mandate for the American people. Fauci, of course, led the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases during the COVID crisis, which he created through his support of gain-of-function mad science that was at first initially denied under oath, considered a conspiracy theory, and banned from social media, but is now pretty widely accepted as a fact. Now Dr. Fauci is set to speak on the lessons from COVID and the future of artificial intelligence in medical surveillance and diagnostic. Technology is expected to become the next major profit center for these global pharmaceutical firms. The public face of sweeping lockdowns, mandates, and emergency powers is appearing alongside corporations that are more powerful than ever. It's clear to me that they're receiving marching orders from the Mengele of our area. This is not acceptable. Dr. Fauci needs to be brought up on charges of crimes against humanity, and I believe, obviously, lying under oath to Congress, and if convicted in a court of law, imprisoned for the rest of his life for his cause in causing the COVID-19 and its brutal aftermath. Anything less, well, we'll be inviting another nightmare like the lockdowns that happened before. Meanwhile, 4 years after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the war grinds on, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky refuses to admit reality. In a weekend interview that I saw, Zelensky declared that he will not surrender any territory in the eastern Donbass region and still considers victory to mean restoring Ukraine's 1991 borders, reclaiming every inch seized by Russia since 2022. Zelensky insists that Ukraine will take the land in time, but admits that his country lacks the manpower and the weapons to do so today, and is demanding more Western support to make it possible. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has repeatedly urged Kyiv to face the grim reality. Prolonging this war could cost hundreds of thousands of more lives, while the battlefield situation continues, sadly, to favor Moscow. Of course, this does not matter to Zelensky, as he was installed by the globalists and not backed by popular elections. Again, he's an actor-comedian who I believe was essentially hired to play the role of a Ukrainian president. He doesn't have to worry about the people because he barks orders while standing in front of a green screen. And don't let them tell you it's about democracy, because he has repeatedly postponed elections. At the same time, he arrests journalists, closes down newspapers, closes down radio stations. He's even outlawed the single largest church in the country. Zelensky's also pushing for sweeping concessions from the West, including NATO troops stationed in Ukraine backed by U.S. air power and a 30-year American security guarantee before holding any elections. Russian officials have flatly rejected those demands and maintain any peace deal requires Ukraine to abandon contested territories and permanently rule out NATO membership. That's the heart of this entire issue, really. Talks in Geneva last week produced no progress. Zelensky's position amounts to an open-ended war financed by U.S. taxpayers. He wants more money, more weapons, more foreign troops, and decades-long guarantees, all while refusing any territorial compromise despite his very limited military leverage. This man is a deranged dictator, and he should receive no more support from the United States. In my opinion, it's time to cut Zelensky loose and let him receive the Ceausescu treatment from his own people in the streets, because I think that's what he so richly deserves. There's a reason why he doesn't call for an election. He knows he cannot win one. Many Americans have lost the entire point here, but it's a very simple one. Back when East and West Germany were allowed to be unified by the Russians, we signed an agreement, the Budapest Memorandum, in which we agreed not to push Ukraine into NATO. We reaffirmed that in yet another signed agreement with the Soviets, the Minsk Accords. We are now in violation of both of those, as Joe Biden and his foreign policy pushed Ukraine into NATO, which really means putting NATO missiles financed by the United States taxpayers on the ground in Ukraine pointed at Russia. This has always been Putin's line in the sand. It is the reason why this war grinds on, why so many thousands of lives have been lost, why so many millions of dollars have been squandered. Every American, regardless of party, every American prays for peace. It will be interesting to see if President Trump raises the question of the Ukraine-Russian conflict tonight in his State of the Union address. I think it is time to call Zelensky's bluff and be done with this. The American people are tired of paying for an endless foreign war with no end in sight, and now you know the history of it. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And you're diving back into the Stone Zone. For more than 2 decades, America has run a massive education experiment. Unfortunately, our kids are paying the price. Since the early 2000s, starting with programs like Maine's laptop rollout, schools across the country have replaced traditional textbooks with computer screens. By 2024, taxpayers had spent roughly $30 billion putting laptops and tablets into classrooms. The promise was efficiency and modernization, but test scores for children have been in free fall as a result. Researchers now report that Generation Z is the first generation in modern history to show lower cognitive performance than the previous one. Standardized testing data demonstrates this sad reality is irrefutable. Instead of sharpening minds, constant screen exposure is actually weakening attention, comprehension, and memory formation. Experts testifying before Congress have stated the obvious, that children do not learn best through endless digital stimulation. Human brains develop through focus, repetition, and deep reading, not notifications, multitasking, and constant scrolling. Policymakers embraced Silicon Valley's marketing, which of course included lots of wooing by lobbyists and huge campaign contributions from special interests, and by doing so, they did a great disservice to our nation's children. The consequences don't stop at school, actually. Early research that I just read from Stanford suggests that artificial intelligence is already hitting entry-level workers the hardest, the very generation raised on these devices instead of disciplined learning. We're training young Americans for a future that demands critical thinking while systematically undermining their ability to think critically. America faces complex challenges, such as economic competition, national security threats, cultural instability, and so on. We need resilient, capable citizens, not distracted consumers of digital content. It's time, in my opinion, to get back to the basics: reading, writing, and arithmetic. If we don't do so, and do so quickly, our future may well be doomed. A disturbing new report out of Canada is fueling growing concerns that government-approved assisted suicide is moving faster than basic medical care and is ending lives that could have been saved. According to Ontario's Medical Assistance and Dying Review Committee, at least 65 people in 2023 were put to death the same day they requested it. Another 154 people died the very next day. One case involved an elderly woman recovering from heart surgery who initially asked about assisted death, then withdrew her request on religious grounds and sought hospice care instead. She was then denied hospice care and was quickly approved for euthanasia, then sadly was put to death. Even after one medical profession warned of the possible coercion and questioned the urgency, 2 authorizations approved the procedure. Let us pray that this does not come to the United States. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Whatever you do, don't go away because, well, we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're diving back into the Stone Zone. President Donald Trump only yesterday signed a proclamation designating February 22nd as National Angel Family Day. This is a day honoring Americans whose loved ones were killed by illegal immigrants and bringing their families to the White House to tell their stories that many say the media has long ignored. Standing beside grieving parents and relatives, President Trump called the gathering a solemn occasion, pointing to years of open border policies as the cause of these senseless tragedies. According to President Trump, thousands of violent offenders were allowed into the country in recent years, placing politics ahead of public safety. The president said the victims' families were not only harmed by criminals, but by leaders who put the comfort of foreign criminals before the safety of American citizens. Military and border officials that I respect tell me that as many as 36 million illegals may have entered the country. That's substantially higher than the public estimates. Among those speaking at the White House were Allison Phillips, mother of Georgia nursing student Lincoln Riley, murdered senselessly by an illegal while jogging. Phillips praised stronger border enforcement efforts, warning the nightmare that she's undergoing could be, well, for any family. Steve Ronnebeck, whose son Grant was killed during a robbery by an illegal immigrant in Arizona, said families finally feel heard after many years of silence. Other relatives described similar losses, including the family of Marine veteran Javier Vega Jr., all arguing that deaths were preventable if immigration laws had simply been enforced. Remember when Joe Biden argued that he needed a new law in order to seal our border? President Trump has not needed any new law. He has simply enforced the laws that were already in place. Illegal border crossings have dropped to almost nothing. President Trump also accused major media outlets of downplaying the stories to protect these open border policies. The fake news does everything they can to ignore the victims of illegal immigrant violent crime because, frankly, they want the illegals to invade so that Democrats can get their permanent majority through the demographic avalanche that is underway. We as Americans cannot let that happen. We must therefore deport every illegal, dangerous immigrant to save our nation and keep these tragedies from repeating themselves. Yes, I do think the priority must go to those illegals who are in the country who have a criminal record either in their nation of origin or here in the United States, or those who are awaiting trial in the U.S. Yes, I do think that there should be some system where if an illegal is in the country for 25 years, has an unblemished record of paying taxes, working and violating no laws, perhaps they could be monitored without being deported. I know that some of my friends will say that I'm soft, but I also think that is realistic. Any way you look at it, though, violent, illegal gangbangers and criminals must continue to be deported, and in this, I support the president. Meanwhile, media giant Paramount Global has sweetened its offer to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery, escalating a corporate fight against woke streaming leader Netflix. According to reports, Paramount's improved bid addresses financial concerns and offers shareholders stronger cash certainty than its earlier $30 per share proposal. The stakes, of course, are massive. Warner Brothers had already agreed in principle to sell its film and television studios, including the HBO Max platform, to Netflix for $27.50 a share, while spinning off legacy cable outlets like CNN and TNT. But now Paramount's higher, more secure cash offer could derail that deal and keep iconic Hollywood assets in more traditional media hands, instead of consolidating even more cultural power behind Netflix, which has deep, deep ties to the Obama network. Netflix leadership insists their agreement will hold, accusing Paramount of spreading speculation to disrupt the process. Still, the fact that Warner's reopened the negotiations signals that shareholders may prefer a stronger immediate return over a long-term tech takeover. President Trump publicly urged Netflix to remove board member Susan Rice, criticizing the company's ideological bias after Rice stated that vengeance would be coming against any conservative who supports President Trump's agenda from a reconstituted federal deep state should the Democrats secure power again. So this battle for HBO Warner Brothers will determine whether competitive free markets remain or whether liberal tech monoliths will continue to swallow up the entertainment industry and dictate public opinion. If Paramount and their better offer is shut out, the Trump administration to take a page from Teddy Roosevelt and consider trust-busting Netflix and putting an end to their monopolistic business practices. Meanwhile, a major scandal is rocking the political establishment in Norway. Former Prime Minister Thorbjørn Jagland, the same official who awarded a Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama several months into Obama's presidency, has been hospitalized following a reported suicide attempt. The incident came days after he was formally charged with gross corruption tied to convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Norwegian investigators say that Jagland and his family repeatedly used Epstein's properties in Paris, New York, and Palm Beach between 2011 and 2018, with travel allegedly financed by Epstein himself. Authorities went so far as to request the lifting of Jagland's diplomatic immunity from the Council of Europe, which was revoked just before the police raids. Emails reportedly show Epstein discussing possible back-channel communications involving Russian officials, raising serious geopolitical concerns. But the scandal doesn't just stop there. Additional scrutiny is now falling on other elite figures, including Crown Princess Meta Marit, Borj Brende, now head of the World Economic Forum, and diplomat Mona Jewel, who abruptly resigned. Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store says he supports an independent inquiry. Members of the Epstein network are finally having to suffer the consequences for their actions. Many of the world's elite openly conferred with Epstein when they knew he was a child sex trafficker and a pedophile. They looked the other way and they accepted Epstein's blood money as he continued to traffic and abuse women. They were his collaborators and his enablers. Jagland apparently could not take the shame and tried to off himself, unless, of course, even more powerful figures than he wanted him to silence him. That is always a possibility in these disgustingly corrupt world of geopolitics that's even too ugly for me to fathom. The Democrat Party promised transparency after its 2024 defeat. Instead, it delivered, a cover-up. Following President Donald Trump's return to the White House, the Democrat National Committee conducted a detailed autopsy analyzing why voters rejected their agenda and their candidates. Party leaders assured donors and activists the report would be released. Then suddenly, it was buried. Officially, Democrats claim they want to focus on winning Congress in 2026, but even insiders admit that explanation doesn't hold water. Several party strategists say the real motive was protecting top figures and consultants from accountability and shielding future presidential hopefuls from political damage. Now we're learning what the party didn't want voters to see. According to reporting confirmed by multiple participants, DNC officials privately acknowledged their position on the Israel-Gaza war hurt them at the ballot box. Party analysts conclude the administration's support for Israel was viewed negatively by key activist blocs within the Democrat voter coalition. In other words, the political problem wasn't that Democrats alienated moderates, it's that they didn't distance themselves from Israel enough to satisfy the radical left that has hijacked their party. Even former Vice President Kamala Harris has hinted as much, saying that the administration should have publicly criticized Israel more and that the White House's blank check perception damaged her campaign for president. So the implication here is clear. Rather than reconsider progressive policies rejected by working class voters, party leaders appear ready to move further towards the demands of their activist and extremist base, even on foreign policy. The suppressed report reveals a party not moderating after defeat, but drifting even further left while hiding the evidence. The Democrats' embrace of extremism may satisfy their base, but will only alienate independents heading into the midterm elections. Meanwhile, Mexico is descending even deeper into cartel barbarism, and anyone pretending otherwise is lying to the American people. The killing of El Mencho, the longtime leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, has not brought stability or peace. It has ignited a new wave of chaos, arson, blockades, and mass terror that now reaches far beyond border towns and rural smuggling corridors. It's reached airports. It's reached resort cities. It's reached the very places Americans have long been told are safe. For years, politicians, tourism boards, and multinational corporations have promoted the fiction that Mexico's cartel war exists in contained zones far from vacation beaches and luxury hotels. That illusion is now collapsed in full public view. El Mencho is not simply another criminal kingpin. He built the CGNG into one of the most powerful and violent transnational criminal organizations on earth. His cartel controls vast fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine distribution networks that flood America's streets with poison. His organization pioneered the use of military-style tactics, armored vehicles, drone explosives, and coordinated mass attacks against police and the military. The United States government placed a $15 million bounty on his head. Mexican government labeled him as the most dangerous fugitive alive. Yet despite years of manhunts, he remained operational, protected by layers of corrupt officials, corrupt local politicians, corrupt police commanders, and compromised institutions. When Mexican security forces finally located and killed El Mencho, that was on February 22nd, officials quickly declared victory. But within hours, Mexico had erupted. Cartel gunmen set entire highways ablaze. Tractor trailers and fuel tankers were torched and used as burning barricades. Gun battles broke out across multiple states. Businesses were firebombed. Civilians were ordered off roads at gunpoints. Entire cities went into lockdown. This is not just random violence. It is routine cartel violence. The cartels were sending a message to the Mexican state and to the world. Kill our leaders and we will burn your country. Their message clearly was received. In cities like Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, areas long marketed as safe tourist havens, terrified visitors were ordered by authorities to shelter inside hotels. Roads leading to international airports were blocked by flaming vehicles. Flights were diverted. Others were canceled outright. Thousands of travelers have been stranded. Let that sink in for a minute. Major resort corridors and airport infrastructures were directly affected by cartel retaliation. The notion that tourists exist inside some invisible bubble of protection is now dead. The cartels no longer respect imaginary red lines. They no longer pretend to avoid economic disruption. They understand leverage. Tourism is one of Mexico's largest sources of revenue. Targeting applies pressure on the government. That's why they do it. This is what a narco state looks like, and Mexico has long been a narco state. The killing of a cartel boss does not dismantle an empire, but it is a beginning. It fragments it. Fragmentation produces splinter factions. Splinter factions will now fight for territory. Turf wars generate mass murder. This pattern has repeated itself for decades. Every time a kingpin falls, violence spikes. Civilians pay the price. Journalists pay the price. Small business owners pay the price. Now tourists are beginning to pay the price as well. We'll be back with more about the cartels and the president's effort to end the deadly flood of drugs into the United States on the other side. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to Stone Zone. Whatever you don't go away because, well, we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone for our final segment. The American Republic today, in my opinion, stands at a civilizational crossroads suspended between ordered liberty and administrative anarchy, between a constitutional architecture painstakingly erected by geniuses, the founding fathers, and a creeping ideology imposed by opportunists who prefer procedural murkiness to transparent law. The Save America Act emerges in this moment not as some partisan bauble, but as a civilization instrument, a keystone placed beneath a sagging arch to prevent the entire structure of the United States from collapsing into historical oblivion. What is the Save America Act, if not a reaffirmation of our first principles? What is citizenship, if not a sacred threshold that separates participants from spectators in the grand drama of self-government? What is a vote, if not a sacrament of sovereignty, a solemn attestation that an individual casting it is a lawful member of a political body? The Save America Act, formerly entitled the Safeguard American Voters Eligibility Act, was introduced in early February 26 in the 119th Congress. It builds upon earlier incarnations of the SAVE Act, which successfully passed the House in prior sessions but stalled in the U.S. Senate. A familiar graveyard where common sense reforms often go to die. The SAVE Act is really very simple. It says two very simple things. One must be a U.S. citizen in order to vote, and one must have an ID in order to do so. Now, that has 50 votes today in the U.S. Senate. But under the cloture rules of the U.S. Senate, with 50 votes, it cannot be brought up for a vote where Vice President J.D. Vance could break a tie and the SAVE Act would become law. To me, this is just common sense. The U.S. House of Representatives already demonstrated its willingness to advance this reform in earlier visions. So why is the U.S. Senate dithering? Why does the so-called filibuster rule stop us from saving the nation? The U.S. Senate must pass this, and the relevant committees in both chambers, including those overseeing election administration and constitutional affairs, must complete their review and their reporting process. At its core, the Save America Act would amend the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. And once again, it simply requires documentary proof of United States citizenship when an individual registers or updates their registration to vote in federal elections. This isn't radical. This isn't exotic. This isn't draconian. It's the equivalent of requiring a ticket before boarding a train. Acceptable documentation would include a real ID, compliant identification indicating citizenship, or a valid U.S. passport, a military identification paired with service records showing United States birth, or other government-issued photo identifications, including birth certificates, which confirm citizenship. States would be required to verify citizenship, accepting registrations, and to maintain ongoing programs ensuring that only citizens remain on voter rolls. Recent versions also emphasized a nationwide photo identification required for federal elections, stricter standards for mail-in voting, and the creation of a pre-election citizenship confirmation system. These provisions are not instruments of exclusion, they're actually instruments of clarification. The Republic is not a house of mirrors. This populace is not conducting a seance where invisible hands shuffle ballots behind closed curtains or under tables. It's a courthouse, not a carnival. President Trump has publicly endorsed the Save America Act, framing it correctly as an essential pillar in a broader effort to nationalize baseline American standards requiring voter identification and curtailing the industrialization of mail-in voting except for in narrow and legitimate circumstances. Like all Americans, I pray for passage in the U.S. Senate. I pray for an end to the filibuster and the passage of a simple law requiring that one be a U.S. citizen in order to vote and have an identification to prove it. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially healthcare. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.